If one were to meet the Queen today, one would obey a very delicate etiquette and address her in a very specific way. One would say not Your Royal Highness or Your Excellency or My Lady, but the far more deferential Your Majesty, a title first taken in Britain by Henry VIII in the wake of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. And before Henry VIII, British monarchs were referred to as Your Grace, and to fail to use that term was to play with death. The Yoruba people of West Africa refer to their chieftains as Kabiyesi, which means quite simply one whose words are beyond question, because titles for kings and queens and princes and diplomats and popes and priests speak to the esteem in which they are held and the power that they represent. And if one were to have been granted an audience with a Mesopotamian emperor 4,000 or 3,000 years ago in Assyria or Babylon or Persia or Acadia, there would have been an equally specific title, the use of which would have been vital to one's survival. One would have said, not Your Majesty, but Shamshi, which means my sunlight. While in the modern age we've abstracted the titles of power into terms like highness and majesty and excellency and grace, the ancient world preferred concrete metaphors, and the most potent and pervasive symbol of power was the sun. Its rays bathe the earth in heat and illumination, where they energize crops, crystallize rocks, drive the weather, warm the oceans, and serve as the literal light of our lives. There was nothing more important, more central to the ancient mythic imagination than the sun, which is why almost every single cult and civilization saw their sun god as paramount in the pantheon of divinities. Egypt had Ra, Greece had Apollo, the Romans had Sol, the Incas had Inti, the Inuits had Akisha, the Chinese had Zia, the Turks had Koyash, the Celts had Belanos, the Norse peoples had Suna, and the Mesopotamians had Shamash. All over the world, traces of places used to worship and venerate the sun remain as relics for us to see and visit. Megaliths and pyramids from Peru to Cambodia to India and England with its Stonehenge. And this is precisely why, repeatedly, the Torah teaches us to steer our reverence away from the heavens for fear of us being drawn into idolatry. In Devarim, for example, Moshe cautions the people, Ten tisa einecha hashamayma, beware when you lift your eyes to the skies, v'ra'ita et hashemesh v'et hayareach v'et hakochavim, and you see the sun and the moon and the stars, v'nidachta v'nishtachavita lahem v'avaratam, not to be lured into their service. Every week, to this day, this morning, we all say or sung a hymn to the heavens composed by mystical poets thousands of years ago. Kel Adon is a sonnet that celebrates sun rays and moonshine and starlight. But the poets who penned it constantly credit God with rule over those divine-like orbs of light. Kara lashemesh v'yizrach or, it is He who summons the sun to shed its light. Ra'ah v'hitkin surat halvana, it is He who sees and sets the moon's cycle. But though the sun's force risks it enthralling our religious imaginations, it remains one of the most pervasive symbols of power and renewal and hope. In Jewish tradition, too, as our prophet Malachi speaks of the Messianic age, he says, V'zarcha lachem shemesh tzedakah, a sun of justice will rise for you, umarpeh bichnafeha, with healing in its wings. Which all leads us to a moment that we read this morning when Yaakov wrestles with a stranger who has been seen as an angel. V'yivateh Yaakov levado, Yaakov was all alone. V'yavek ish imo, and a man wrestled with him. Ad alot hashachar, until sunrise. Vayomer, and he said, Shalacheni, set me free. Ki Allah hashachar, for the sun had risen. And this is my question. What was it about the dawn that brought this brawl to an urgent end? Why does the fight that festered through the night need to finish at first light? Why does this figure seem so eager to leave, so desperate to depart, so troubled by the sun? Shalacheni, set me free, ki Allah hashachar, for the sun has risen. Now, for some, it is precisely for its symbolic power that sunrise marks the end of Yaakov's fight, teaching both him and us that after darkness comes the dawn, after pain comes relief, after death comes new life. In the words of one of the medieval masters, Af al pi, even though she's felut sarot rabot bagalot, we have experienced great suffering in exile, yu betuchim shalo yavedu, we must have faith that we will not perish. Kamo shematzinu ba'av, as we found with our father, shazarcha lo hashemesh, that the sun rose for him. Ken yizrach lo hashemesh el Mashiach, so too will the sun of Messiah rise for us, v'yarpeinu, and heal us mitzarenu, from our pain, v'yagilenu, and redeem us. But there are some other quite stunning readings of the scene where dawn brings the brawl to a close, not for its symbolic resonance, but for very practical purposes. For a whole cadre of commentators, dawn beckoned or threatened Yaakov's supernatural opponent. Most famously for Rashi, the angel needed to leave because dawn was the cue for the divine chorus. Sarich ani lomar shira, I need to sing. As portrayed so touchingly in Nicolas Cage's 1998 film City of Angels, where the cloak of night lifts off the Pacific coast to the sound of an otherworldly harmony. There is a major stream of Jewish tradition in which angels are seen as singing with the rising sun. And the Bechor Shor agrees that the supernatural adversary needed to leave because of dawn, but he sees the impetus as far more ominous, because for him the opponent was not a traditional angel but a demon. And ein derech hamazikim lihitraut bayom, much like vampires of modern folklore, demons fear daylight. But there is one final reading that I'd like to share with you today, which struck me as so deeply poignant and key. And in this reading offered by Rabbi Gad Dishi, it wasn't Yaakov's foe who needed to leave and begged to be freed, but Yaakov himself. In preparation for confrontation with his brother, who he still imagines wants him dead, Yaakov had split the camp in two. One half formed a delegation that he sent ahead to greet his brother with gifts, and the other was his family that he had sent in the opposite direction for their protection. A sound strategy, part of which was that he would wait on the other bank of the river, waiting to meet his brother alone, shielding his family from harm. But Rabbi Dishi suggests that Yaakov, without GPS, had lost his way and gotten disorientated. Moments before clashing with this stranger, he had called out in prayer and said, Katonti mekol chasidim, I am unworthy of all this kindness, kivamakli avarti et hayarden hazeh, because with my staff I have crossed over this Jordan, va'ata hayiti lishnei machanot, and now I am between two camps. Thanking God for his strategic success, now standing between the camp of gifts and his children, Yaakov describes himself crossing the Jordan and preparing for battle. But Yaakov had not just crossed the Jordan. The text tells us, V'ya'avor et ma'avar Yabok, he had crossed the Yabok River, a river which flowed perpendicular to the river Jordan. So it seems that he was not standing between his fleeing family and an advancing army, but actually had sent his wife and children right into Esau's path. And it was only when the sun rose that Yaakov realized his error, because not only does the sun bequeath us light and heat, but until the 11th century in the West, it was the primary means of rudimentary triangulation. Wherever we are in the world, each morning the sun reveals which way is east. And Yaakov at dawn saw the sun rise not behind the river, but to its side, which is how he suddenly realized that he was not standing by the Jordan at all and had not sent his family to safety, but had crossed the Yabok and put them in great jeopardy. So he says to his foe, Shalcheni, set me free. Ki Allah hashachar, for the sun had risen, giving him direction and filling him with fear. And while this reading is refreshing in its creativity and compelling in its dramatic gravity, it also suggests something profound about our final forefather, the man after which we as a people take our name. It tells us that though he was disoriented and had lost his way, his moral compass never wavered. Not for a single instant did his focus on family falter. Though it would be natural for anyone in a fight to lose sight of deeper commitments and think solely of triumph, Yaakov's mind is unswervingly on the lives of his wives and children. No matter where he found himself in the world, the axis around which he revolved was those to whom he was responsible. No matter how geographically adrift he became, his moral commitments were unshakable. He was unfailingly devoted to them. And as the winter comes and the sun recedes behind clouds and cold, let us all find ways to calibrate our moral compasses to keep ourselves oriented toward goodness, no matter how dark it gets. Let us all deepen our devotion to each other and our mission to heal and teach and lead ourselves and our peers toward a life of meaning and peace. I wish you all a Shavua Tov.